to the World War II Apricot Plots panel, and we're delighted today to be here to commemorate VE Day, and we've got some of our lovely World War II authors here to speak to you about their inspiration and their work. And we've got the lovely Angela Petch joining us as well, who's not normally one of our members, but we're very pleased to have her along today. And before I get started with some questions, I thought each of the authors could introduce themselves, say hello, and a little bit about what they do. So Jane, perhaps you'd like to start us off.
Well, I'm Jane Cable, and my World War II books are both published by Sapir. They're contemporary romances, but they look back and take inspiration from World War II.
Lovely. And Angela Barton?
Hello, I'm Angela Barton. I've written a World War II story called Arlette's Story. I got my inspiration from visiting the village when I went to France. I'm busy, my work in progress at the moment is a World War II story as well.
Lovely. We've got Julie Houston.
I write romantic comedies, contemporary novels, and I've only got one, Coming Home to Hollycliffe Farm, that is based in World War II. Half of the book is World War II, half of the book is modern day times. That's Hollycliffe Farm, and I just absolutely loved reading, doing the research for it and writing about it.
And Vicki Beeby?
Hi, yeah, I'm Vicki Beeby. My first World War II saga is going to be published by Canello on July the 16th. I hope I got the date right. It's the first of a three-book series. I'm currently writing the second book at the moment.
And then Angela Petch.
Hi, thank you very much for asking me. I should be in Italy today because that's where I live each summer, and but obvious reasons I can't be. But I've written 3 Second World War books, 2 of which have been taken on by Bookouture. And where we live in Italy, we live very near where there was fighting and the country was occupied. So speaking Italian, I've been able to glean lots of stories from local people. And I have another one coming out in spring. So busy.
Thank you. I know I've read lots of your books, and I'm really fascinated by the subject, and all of you, and just in awe of the things that you do. And so one of the things that really fascinates me is where you get your ideas from, like what inspired you to write a World War II story. And perhaps we'll start with Vicki with this one.
It's funny. I sort of, when I'm writing books, my ideas are often sort of ticking away in the background for months or possibly even years before I can form a story out of them. So, and for me, I used to really, well, I still do really love watching the black and white World War II films, and they're always focused on the men, but in the background you'd see the women, and in these RAF films you'd see these women standing around a table pushing blocks around with these long rolls. I used to think, what's their story? What are they doing? And so eventually, after sort of reading around the subject, I found out what they did, and I really wanted to write their story, write about the women and what they did in the Battle of Britain and further on in the war as well. So yeah, that's where it came from.
Yeah, I think that's really good. What about you, Jane?
Well, Another You wasn't originally going to be a World War II book at all, but when I started researching the history of Studland, where I knew I wanted the book to be set, I discovered that it played an incredible part in the preparations for D-Day. And one of the exercises they had there went tragically wrong. And to me, that was a brilliant catalyst for the story. And they also had a lot of American soldiers there billeted around the area in the run-up to D-Day. And sadly, a lot of them lost their lives in Omaha. So again, that spurred me on to make there a great big World War II content in the book.
So you're more inspired by the setting first of all, really?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the setting. I knew from more or less the first time I visited Studland, I wanted to set a book there. It's so beautiful and so remote while still being close to everywhere. It was just the place that spurred me on. And I always start like that. It's the same with Over the Skies. I started with a place, and the World War II content of that book came much, much later in the process.
Angela Barton, how about you?
I've actually written 2 women's contemporary novels, so I wasn't even thinking about writing historical fiction until I went to France, and I'd heard about this ghost village, which I was fascinated to go and explore. And when I got there, well, it was more like a small town. It was completely run down, derelict and deserted. They'd rebuilt it about half a mile away. So I visited this town that the Nazis had driven into on the 10th of June 1944. And you could still see inside the houses with obviously the furniture had rotted, but there was still, all the metalwork was still there, cars in the garage, household pots. And it was so moving. And I just started thinking about the families that would have lived there on that day. And that I felt compelled to help keep the story alive for future generations by writing what actually happened there through the eyes of a fictional character. But there's a huge weight of responsibility that comes with that, because I wanted to honour their last hours alive with honesty and respect. And so I had to choose my words very carefully. So, I honoured them, and I didn't want to glamorise the story at all.
I think you did a brilliant job. I got goosebumps with you talking about it, actually, because I've read your story, and I think you've done such a brilliant and moving job of telling their tale. It
Thank
really
you.
quite touching.
Thank you.
Angela, Petch, how about you?
Well, I've read Angela's book too, and goosebumps have come back to me now. But I agree. My first book was actually inspired by my mother-in-law, who's Italian, and she was a war bride, and she married an English soldier, which is, and she's now got Alzheimer's, unfortunately. But before she started to lose her mind, she told me lots and lots of her stories. And again, like Angela, you feel a weight of responsibility, but you want to get it right. You don't want to turn it into a history book, but you want to get the emotion and the ordinary person's experiences through. That's what I try to do in my books. They went through such a lot. I mean, we think we're going through a lot now, but I just think it's nothing in comparison to what they went through. So I self-published first of all, but and then I went with Bookouture, who got me to change a few things, but I didn't want them to change certain things, which were the reason I wrote the books. So I think that's something you have to sort of fight your corner when you're writing and justify why you're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Julie, did your inspiration come from family stories and things as well? How about you?
Yeah, both my parents joined up at 17. They were very, very young towards the end of the war. So my dad was in the army. He was actually at the D-Day landings. And there is a photograph that we think is him. It was on a TV programme, and we managed to screenshot it. I've been trying to find it, actually. But my mum, they were the best days of her life. She was 17. She went down to Gloucestershire, where they trained the cooks. There was a lot of training down in Gloucestershire. And she trained as a cook. She cooked. She was a waff. And in her wardrobe, there was always a big box of letters, which my sister and I used to sneak into and open. And they were from all the lovely boyfriends she had while she was actually there. And unfortunately, when she died when I was quite young, actually. She was fairly young. And my dad just got rid of all those letters. That was his way of coping, obviously, but I just wish we'd still got them. But they both used to talk about them. As you say, what they went through, those D-Day landings, you see these young men, 17, just landing, and some of them never even got onto the shore. So I always wanted to write something about it. And I have Madge, my mum was Marjorie, and James, my dad was James, and it wasn't their love story whatsoever. They didn't really get together until they came out of the war, in those early 50s, really. But it was very much based on what they've told me about their lives during the war, and the good time that my mum had, really. Yeah. I wanted to write a story of passion, and my Hollyclose Farm is about quite a passionate story between Midge and her James. So yeah, I feel it's one of my most passionate stories, actually.
That sounds great. One of the things that fascinates me, so you've got your ideas, but then I think, and I was saying about being a little bit in awe of you, because I think anybody who writes about the past has so much research to do, because there's so much that you need to get right. You know, the people can't just make a cup of tea in your books. It's got to be, you know, fitting for the time. So everything needs to be right. How do you go about your research? Perhaps, Angela Barton, you could start us off.
What helped me a lot was visiting Orador about 4 times. They have a museum there, which you can imagine is a font of knowledge. The internet is fantastic. I watch films, read books, read newspaper clippings. Although the 6 survivors have died now, I've managed to read their memoirs. So an awful lot of places, really. And I think reading other novels of the same genre really helps, because you just pick up little facts here and there that you didn't know that you can weave into your story in a different way.
Yeah, really good. About you, Angela, Petch?
Well, I think it's a combination of 2 things. I speak Italian fluently, so there are still some people alive in the village where we live who can remember the war. In fact, my latest book, called The Tuscan Girl, one of the central characters is based on an elderly gentleman that I met about 10 years ago, and he turned 100 this January. But he I was walking, I met him, and he started to speak to me in English, and it turned out that he had been a prisoner of war in England. So I was able to research his story. So I think I start with people and then go to the museums and look in books. I mean, I'm looking at a great big pile of books I've got at the moment. I've also got author and historian friends over in Italy, and yeah, there's a lot of material on the internet, but you have to be careful that it is always authentic as well. So yeah, and also people's memories aren't always brilliant, so you have to check that kind of thing as well. But I didn't like history at school. We had such a boring teacher. She just made us write out notes that she wrote on the blackboard. But now I'm really interested. So I wish I could go back sometimes.
Yeah, I think social history makes such a difference, doesn't it? You know, when you're not faced with the books and things. Vicki, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm having a bit of trouble at the moment because of lockdown. Means I can't go out and go to all the museums and the archives and everything that I really wanted to visit. I do read a lot of diaries. I mean, with the pilots, there are lots of diaries you can get and read, and they're really full of lots of information. With the women, it's much harder because I don't have so many diaries written by the WWIIs, but there are some, so I've got those. But there's an excellent resource on the BBC website called The People's War, which has lots and lots of personal recollections. I've been going sort of devouring those. There's little snippets. They're just brilliant. So it's all that. I mean, when I was researching the Tuscan Girl, I went to museums like the Battle of Britain bunker in Uxbridge, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, but it's more difficult now. I can't go out and about.
Julia, I saw you nodding away there. Is that something you've used as well?
I know, I got loads of stuff. I'm just looking up here. I sent off for loads of books from Amazon. They were second-hand books of wars, of WAF's memories and things. So yeah, lots of research. I made the basic mistake. My agent said, right, send me your first couple of stuff. So I was writing. It's the first time I'd ever written this sort of thing. And I think what I did was I did the research and then tried to put it into the book, and she said, no, this is just coming over so wooden. You're making the mistake that a lot of people do when they first start writing history. So I had to get rid of that all and start again. I was trying to get into the fact that the pillows for the WAT, they were called biscuits. And so, I was determined to get that in somewhere, and it came over as terribly wooden. It didn't come over naturally. So I think you have to be careful when you look at research that you don't put it down as if it's a history lesson, really.
Yeah, Jane, how have you done with your research?
Well, I like you, I'm in awe of everybody else because I write contemporary, just looking back to World War II. So I don't have the issue of how would they have made a cup of tea and all those sorts of things in the first person narrative. So I don't have to know all that detail, but I do need to know detail in certain very specific areas. I mean, yes, the actual history of what happened at Studland Bay for another U, and I was very lucky there because I met a chap who'd restored one of the tanks, and he was a font of all knowledge. And then the local National Trust warden had taken an oral history of the area, so there was plenty of information out there. With Endless Skies, it was more the small things, knowing what sort of powder compact and what a utility lipstick would have looked like and things like that. It would have been so easy if my mum had still been alive, but as it was, there was an awful lot of research just to get the tiny details that you have to get right.
Absolutely, there's so much to think about, isn't there? I think that World War II is a particularly hot topic at the moment. It seems to be really popular in books, and I was wondering if you could tell me why you think that is, perhaps with you, Vicky, because your book is newly signed and new cover reveal, and we can see your lovely cover behind you. What do you think? Why do you think that the World War II genre is so popular at the moment?
I think there are quite a few reasons. I think to start with, it's a time of history where you've got that element of danger, so you've instantly got that extra excitement in the and poignancy really in the story. So that's sort of ready-made. But I think at the moment, I think there's this growing sense that we're losing that generation, that they won't be around for much longer. And I think there's something about wanting to honour their contribution and to capture it before they've gone, really. And possibly it's because it's part of the recent past, and we all know somebody who's been there. So it's and possibly there's something about trying to see, try almost to relive it and to work out how we would have coped, and to try and put ourselves in the shoes of our heroines or characters, and see how would we have coped if we were in that situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, part of me is thinking, I mean, my son 25 in London, I'm thinking, God, we think we're badly done to at the moment, but God, that could be a war and he could be now going off. How did mothers cope knowing that there's, and my daughter was 22, she'd have been off and props on the front line as well. I can't imagine how mums and dads as well coped knowing their children were going off to war. I really don't.
Yeah, it's a scary thought, isn't it?
Having lived in France for 2 years recently, I have spoken to families that are still not speaking to other sections of their families because some particular groups of that family spoke to the Germans and others didn't. And even now, generations later, who had nothing to do with the war, there's still that gap in the family group. It's quite tragic. And you do think, what, as Vicky said, what would we have done? Because I think until you have starving children, no way of feeding them, and sick and at death's door, you don't know if you would befriend a German if there was some way that you could get some food to feed your children. You just don't know.
I agree with you. And also the fact that there's this kind of cowboys and Indians or comic boy image of the Germans and us, and not all the Germans were baddies. And I just, you think about the characters and the reasons for why they went for war, whether they didn't all believe in what they were doing. Yeah, so it's a fascinating subject. And I've got I've still got, I'm a hoarder, but I've got letters that my mother died when she was far too young. She got married during the war. She was only 70 when she died. Both my parents were 70. And we got lots of their papers. And I found the letter that they'd sent about her only brother. He was only 19 when he was shot down in the war. So I'm thinking in the future I might write something around that. It's this desire to remember, I think, to commemorate these fantastic people who are just almost within reach of us. And as Vicky said, before it's too late, we should try and remember what they did. I think you said something like that, Vicky, sorry. You will.
It is such very recent history, really, isn't it? Jane, have you got anything to add to that?
No, not really. I think it's all been said. It is about remembering the testimony of these people because we are probably the last generation who's heard much of it firsthand from parents and grandparents, and it's setting it down and passing it on, really.
Absolutely, which is why I think what you all do is so important, really, as well, because you bring those stories to life. And one of the things that fascinates me when I read your stories is I know that we've said about you've taken from family history and that kind of thing. I think if I was doing it, I'd be worried about at what point is it okay for poetic license to step in, particularly if you're talking about close family members, and you, Ange, with your Angela Barton, with your very moving story there in France. How do you balance between portraying the story and then also being a fiction writer as well, as you all are? How does that look for you, Ange Barton?
I think as long as you keep true to the original events, like the massacre at Oradour and the invasion of the Germans coming south, I think if you keep the most important information true to the facts, then if you're writing about a family life, as long as you've got the information that's correct for that time of the century, I think you can just, you have conversations with family, and your fictional characters make friends and fall in love. So that's the same whatever year, isn't it? Family life and relationships. So as long as you've got the key events accurate, I think you can merge the two.
Angela, Petch, how did you deal with that sort of responsibility?
Right, well, some of it's true and some of it is fictionalized, and I did have a relative complain that I'd named one of the characters who's not so pleasant with their father's name, and they were convinced that I was using their father as a model, which I wasn't. But you've always got that clause at the beginning of your book when I don't know how it goes, but any resemblance to true people is etc. etc. You've got that clause to help you. I've been thanked for writing my books, because people have said it made them think of their father, or it made them think of somebody they knew. So yeah, I think we've got artistic license as long as we respect facts, as Angela said.
And Judy Houston, did you feel the same? Because you've said about writing about family.
Yeah, I suppose I've named my main characters after my own parents, but there was nothing like it at all. I mean, my dad was just a squaddy, I suppose, whereas James is very high up, very high ranking. So I didn't encroach on that at all. So no, I didn't have any problem that way. What did come into that story, how this story all started, was because of a house that my husband and I wanted to buy, and we knew there was some huge mystery about it. And it was actually called Winnie Close Farm, so that's why I call the book Holly Close Farm. And there'd been a murder there just after the Second World War. So that is the sort of modern day bit in my particular book as well. So I had to be very careful about that as well, because people still live at that farm, and 2 policemen were actually murdered at the farm. And you know, I didn't want to be bringing that up again. So I think you do have to be very, very careful. And I put that in the acknowledgements somewhere along the line about that. I think you do have to be careful. You don't want to be bringing up history that people want to forget, really.
Angela Barton, you touched a little bit there on love in stories, because you're all also romance writers as well.
Yes.
So I was interested to know what drives your plot more, the story and the World War II element, or the love story? What do you feel is sort of pushing you along? Jane, perhaps you could answer.
Well, because I'm writing slightly different to the others, I'm writing contemporary with this look back to the past. My stories are very, very much relationship driven. The history, if you like, is the backdrop, and it's the reflection of the current story, the contemporary story. It's almost a subplot, if you like. So the main story is always the romance between the two main characters for me.
What about you, Vicky?
It's very similar. I would say that although I obviously wanted to portray the lives of the WAPs and the pilots, really the main driving force of the story is the romance between Evie and Alex, the hero and heroine. But I was also thinking, because it's a 3-book series, and friendship is important across the books, and I would say that although it's the individual romances that drive each book, it's the friendship between these 3 girls that drives the whole series, if you like.
Yeah, friendship's so important to stories anyway, isn't it? How about you, Angela Barton?
I think the two weave throughout the story, the romance and the World War II side of things. But I think it's very important, as you say, to have friendships and to have family dynamics as well. So I think they weave in and out, because the hero of my story actually spends some time in Drancy away from Arlette, the main character. So I would say 50-50, weaving in and out.
What about you, Julie?
Yeah, I think the romance, absolutely. Of all my books, I think James is the one I love the most. James is the one that I would have wanted to meet back in history. Yeah, it's the romance, it really is.
And was that the same for you, Angela Petch?
Well, mine are actually all dual time, so I do have contemporary stories going on. I mean, I find the relationships easier to write than the bits about the war, to be honest. So and I've got other themes in there as well. It's not just about love and battles. I'm fascinated by cultural differences, because I'm married to somebody who's half Italian, and my books are set in Italy and in England, so that's a facet that I find interesting too. And yeah, so but I find the love side easier to write. I feel more liberated, and sometimes I think I'm experimenting a little bit myself on the write, doing things I wouldn't do normally.
Perks of being a writer, I'm sure. And finally, then, I know when as I said, I've read lots of your books, all of you, and for me, there's some real standout images and things that have happened. So finally, who's your favourite character in your books? Because I think people always love to know that. So perhaps Judy Houston, you could start us off.
I think it probably is James. I totally fell in love with him, yeah. I was transported back in time into history, and he was a very modern man, you know. He was the man that I would have liked to have met, yes, definitely.
You've got us all intrigued about James now. Ange Barton, who was your favourite to write about?
My favourite was Arlette, and here she is walking through a field of poppies, and I loved her because I wanted to choose a very ordinary and innocent character, because I was going to put some terrible obstacles in her way, and so I needed her to grow and become stronger and overcome those obstacles. So she's my favourite.
And what about you, Jane?
Well, for me, it's the veteran George in Another You. His wisdom embodies the best of the wartime generation, as far as I can see. He's humorous, he's wise, he's down to earth, and he has the benefit of 50 years of hindsight to put his experience in the war into context. And that helps my heroine Marie in an awful lot of ways, both understanding the relationship she's having with the contemporary soldier and how things really were in the past. I just love George. I'd love to have met a George, and I suppose I have met many Georges along the way, really.
Your George is reminding me of, I think it's Maximo in your story there, Angela.
Yes, Massimo. Yes,
Massimo.
It might
yeah,
have
that's similar. And I based him on Bruno, who is 100, but I have artistic license, obviously. But the fact that he was plucked from a country area at such a young age, went to Egypt, ended up in England, and he's also very kind. Yeah, I love old people, actually. I love listening to their stories. But I like some of my minor characters. There's a minor character that I would have liked to have been Molly. She's very carefree and liberated, and her husband's away, and she's a bit naughty while he's away, and I quite like her as well.
I raised my eyebrows when you said you were going to be Molly then. How about you, Vicky? Who's your favourite?
In the end, I've opted for Jess, whose story I haven't even written yet. She's going to be the heroine of the third book. But I think because she's totally the opposite of me. She's a complete flirt, an extrovert, and she's been such fun to write. And she's always got, the right quip to say, which takes me about 3 months to actually get the right quip for her to say, But for her, obviously, it just comes naturally, and it's been a lot of fun. But I've had to save her book for the last because I thought she'd be the most difficult one to write, to sustain for a whole book.
That's again one of the wonderful things about writing, isn't it? These characters can do all kinds of things that you don't. So, well, anyway, ladies, we're going to run out of time soon, but I just wanted to say a huge thank you, because it's been so lovely to talk to you all and for you to share your stories of how you write and things. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.